It's Nick!
Nikki! Hi, baby!
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids wasn't a story about superheroes. It wasn't a fight in space. It wasn't even a story. It turned a backyard into a huge escape story. But behind the huge Cheerios and the scary tractor, there was chaos held together with duct tape and a need to move quickly. The director quit before the film began. Rick Moranis stepped in after bigger stars dropped out, and even though the summer was full of big hits, Batman stole the show with his small picture as a secret tool. Here are 20 strange things about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And hidden in the danger and chaos, it went from being horrifying to a backyard becoming dangerous. It wasn't playtime for kids, this garden was made to kill. Number 1. The movie we remember as a fun summertime trip in the backyard almost started out as something much darker. The cult horror director Stuart Gordon, who made movies like From Beyond and Reanimator, came up with the idea. I Shrunk the Kids when he first pitched Honey. The movie wasn't a silly family comedy. It was more like a fee survival story, with kids who were shrunk facing a garden that looked more like a nightmare than a playground. In Gordon's first image, tall grass stood in for walls. Insects were the bad guys, and the mood was more scary than fun. But then things changed in his life. Gordon became a father around this time, and that changed the way he thought about things. He began to see the story through the eyes of a child, where huge blades of grass were not dangers but adventures, and big toys were not scary but exciting. The scary parts were still there, but they were now played as exciting tasks instead of just plain scary. The project went from being an experimental scary idea to a story with heart, humor, and a sense of childlike wonder. Because of that change in tone, Gordon accidentally set the stage for one of Disney's most famous live-action hits, a movie that showed the magic and danger of childhood imagination. 2. This movie's title went through some really weird drafts before it became a well-known term. Disney first thought of names like Teeny Weenies, Grounded, and The Backyard. They didn't all land. They were too silly, too unclear, or just not interesting enough to make a big summer movie. The writing itself was what made the difference. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is what Wayne Szalinski says out of the blue when he feels like confessing. It was funny, straight to the point, and explained the concept right away. Disney got it even though it had some spelling mistakes, which was a mistake, but it turned out to be brilliant branding. The phrase seemed real. This is what a stressed out dad might say when he realizes he's made the biggest parenting mistake ever. That one bad line made the movie stand out from the other forgettable family sitcoms of the 1980s, and people still quote it today. Stephen Gordon didn't just pitch Honey, I Shrunk the Kids as the third thing. It was his job to lead it. Disney gave the project the go-ahead with his idea in mind, and for months he was seen as the person who would make the small backyard adventure come to life. But fate had other ideas. Gordon got really sick just as production was getting going, so he had to quit the whole project. It was a terrible blow, especially since he came up with the idea in the first place. Disney had to quickly find a new director, and in the end, they hired Joe Johnston. Johnston wasn't a very experienced director. In fact, this would be his first show. For what he didn't have in directing credits, he more than made up for in special effects work. As an effects artist, he had worked on Star Wars and won an Oscar for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Because of that, he was the best person to direct a movie that depended on its realistic effects and sense of scale. It was a good bet. Johnston added a lighter, more playful touch that made the trip feel more like home. He turned what could have been a simple effects show into a classic for the whole family. Gordon never got to direct the movie, but his idea went on because Johnston changed it into the movie that people still love. 4th, Wayne Szalinski, the goofy inventor dad at the center of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, wasn't played by Rick Moranis at first. In the beginning, Disney was interested in Chevy Chase, who was one of the biggest entertainment stars in the world at the time. After movies like Caddyshack, Vacation, and Fletch, Chase seemed like a good choice for the strange scientist, but because of other commitments, he turned down the part. John Candy, another big name in comedy, was next in line. Disney offered him the part, thinking that his funny, big-hearted personality would be enough to carry the movie. Candy also said no, though. He instead suggested his good friend Rick Moranis, which turned out to be a bad idea. Candy had worked with Moranis before and knew that he had the right mix of kindness and strange humor to make Wayne seem real. It all changed because of that one suggestion. Moranis didn't just act the part, he was it. Wayne was a unique movie dad because of his nerdy charm. He wasn't a strict boss or a silly fool. He was a sweet dreamer whose ideas kept getting out of hand. Audiences immediately felt linked, and his part as Wayne Szalinski became one of his most famous. Now that we look back, it's hard to imagine anyone else making the kids smaller. What began as a last-minute acting choice turned out to be one of Disney's most perfect movie magic moments. 5. The Szalinski home looks like a typical American suburban home when seen on TV. Kids riding bikes down streets lined with trees, and neighbors talking on front lawns. But it wasn't real. At Churubusco Studios in Mexico City, Disney built the whole neighborhood from start. The fronts of every house, every lawn, and even the sidewalks were all neatly made. Only a few of the setting shots were taken in California, but that was enough to make the fantasy work. The team had full freedom on the controlled set in Mexico. They could blow things up, flood the yard, and link easily to the big backyard sets where most of the action took place. People didn't even notice how that choice paid off. What seemed like a real, lived-in neighborhood was actually one of Disney's most complex tricks. And the kids' trip from the attic to the garden that looked like a jungle would not have seemed nearly as real without it. 6th, the magic of honey. I Shrunk the Kids wasn't just in the machine, it was also in the garden. The directors couldn't use CGI to make it look like the kids were now the size of ants. Instead, they built a whole world out of huge props that turned a normal yard into something from Alice in Wonderland. Crews built 30-foot grass blades out of fiberglass and foam. They were so tall that they had to be supported like telephone poles. Small cars were made out of Lego bricks, and cookie bits were made out of plaster and painted to look like they were real. What was the most shocking part? There's a huge 16,000-gallon tank full of big floating Cheerios where Rick Moranis is known to try to get his kids to eat breakfast. To make it work, they made big cereal pieces out of urethane foam, covered them in a liquid that looked like milk, and even set up bubbles to make it move like a real bowl. The effect was strange on set. Crew members would joke that they felt like they had been shrunk as they walked through tall grass or leaned against a Lego block the size of a couch. The effect was even stronger for the young actors. They weren't acting like they were going to crawl through a garden. They were living in a playground for giants. That's why those scenes still feel so real after all these years, because they were, in a way. 7th, the Bumblebee ride wasn't just a fun scene in the movie. It was a masterpiece of engineering. The crew made several bees, a full-size prop for close-up shots, a rigged platform that could move the child players around, and a 30,000 robot bee that could do stunts in the air. With great care, each version was carefully matched so that the film could be put together without any gaps. The trick looked so real on screen that kids in the crowd thought the actors were really flying through the sky in their backyard. It took weeks of hard work and lines and hydraulics to make it happen behind the scenes, all to sell a single amazing moment that became one of the most memorable parts of the movie. Number 8, it was meant to be easy for rain. A spray, a hose, and a heavy rainstorm. In Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, on the other hand, normal water looked awful, like mist, so the effects team went off the rails. They added more sugar to the liquid until each drop fell heavy, like jelly from the sky. It didn't drip when it hit the oversized sets, it burst. Huge arcs and crashing waves that looked like water balloons popping slowly. Not only did the players get wet, they were pelted with gallons of sticky rain. Every drip was made to feel like a natural disaster. That's why the storm scene still seems very big. Rain that looked like the sky had turned against them, not CGI. It was rain that was rebuilt from scratch. 19. Many kids saw Honey, I Shrunk the Kids as a big hit in 1989, but it wasn't Rick Moranis or the big backyard sets. It was Auntie, the tough aunt, who became the kids' trusty horse and best friend. Behind the scenes, Disney wasn't sure if anyone should love him. It was a nightmare to build and run Auntie. It wasn't CGI, it was a huge puppet made of rubber, foam, horsehair, and metal supports that up to 16 people could move at the same time. Every move of his antennae and legs had to be carefully timed so that he looked like a bug while also being strangely cute. Even back then, Disney leaders were afraid that people would turn away. Auntie's early versions looked too real and scary, more like something from a horror movie than a fun family journey. Executives recommended making him look more like E.T. or a cartoon bug, but softer and cuter. Joe Johnston, the director, fought back. He thought that the kid's relationship with Aunt should feel natural and not forced. His death wouldn't hurt if he was too cute. Auntie stayed an aunt, flaws and all. A lot of people cried when the time came. Parents said they were crying. Kids cried in the theater. and reviewers said it was one of the most powerful parts of the movie. Disney may not have believed in him, but Auntie made him famous. A six-legged hero who made movie history by crawling. Number 10. That big Oreo cookie was one of the most delicious parts of the movie. The kids exploring the frosting and chocolate crumbs looked like they were having a great time in the garden. The truth is that it wasn't all movie magic. The crew made real cake and frosting parts that could be eaten for close-ups so the young players could really take bites. But the base was made of heavy foam and wood to keep it stable. Part treat, part building project. As the kids climbed across a sticky, melting fake that smelled like a bakery between takes, they were high on sugar. What people saw was a child's dream. The cast and crew remember a set that was both cute and crazy. Number 11. Small things can get missed sometimes. Pay close attention to Diane Selinsky, even in a big, budget Disney movie. In fact, her hair color changes in the middle of the movie. Marcia Strassman started shooting with red hair, but Disney asked her to dye it blonde in the middle of the shoot. Since the early footage was already in the can, they didn't bother to reshoot it. As a result, she changes from red to blonde in different scenes, a big change that no one on set seemed to be worried about. At the time, most people didn't notice because they were so into the experience. You can't take it back once you see it, though. Fans are left wondering how this wasn't noticed before the movie came out. 13. The movie was already the first of its kind before the kids even set foot in the garden jungle. In the beginning credits, it was one of the first animated title sequences to combine traditional hand-drawn animation with early 3D models. It showed little kids dodging typewriters and record players. Kroyer Films did the work. Andrew Stanton, who later co-created Pixar hits like Toy Story and Finding Nemo, and Eric Stefani, Gwen Stefani's brother, were both part of the small studio. Disney liked the scene so much that they hired Kroyer Films right away to make the credits for Troop Beverly Hills and Christmas Vacation. Many fans still remember the big Cheerios and Lego blocks from decades ago, but not many knew that the movie was an important step forward in animation before the adventure even started. 13. The title, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, might not seem strange now, but it was strange in 1989. People who are good at grammar, teachers, and critics all called out the mistake. To be exact, Wayne Selinsky should have said shrunk instead of shrunk. There was so much noise about the movie that it got the 1989 Spell Dunce Cap Award for Worst Grammar in a Title. What did Disney say? Full of confidence, they said it was on purpose because that's how Wayne would have said it. They were really right. The mistake added to the movie's charm by making it sound like something a stressed-out dad would say after firing his kids. What began as a mistake in language turned into a free advertising gift. Nobody could forget the title, even if it didn't win any awards. It's now part of pop culture history. 14. In 1989, people didn't just get one movie ticket, they got two. Before the show Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Disney showed off a brand new Roger Rabbit short called Tummy Trouble. It was the first original animated short from the studio in 25 years, and it made fans remember how amazing Roger Rabbit was the year before. It was a brilliant match. Kids and adults alike laughed through Roger and Baby Herman's cartoon chaos, and then jumped right into Wayne Selinsky's Shrinking Ray story. Because the double feature did so well, Disney kept putting out new Roger shorts along with other movies. It wasn't just extra material. Disney was bringing back an old tradition of short films for the theater. It gave Honey a unique way to start the show, which made the whole thing feel like more than just a movie. 13. Rick Moranis was one of the most cash cow comedy stars in Hollywood in the late 1980s and early 1990s. He had a special charm that came through in movies like Ghostbusters, Spaceballs, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Strange, but lovely. Funny and honest. That was the point. He didn't look like a big star. He was the dad next door, and you knew you could trust him. And just when it looked like he could not fail, tragedy struck. Anne, his wife, died in 1991 after a long illness. When he found himself with only his two young children, Moranis made a decision that is almost never made in Hollywood. He left. It was his life's work to be a full-time dad, so he turned down parts and stayed out of the spotlight. His face was rarely seen in cinemas for many years. Fans kept wondering what happened to Rick Moranis. He wasn't aware that he was busy with the most important thing in his life. He would come back every once in a while to do voice work for animated movies, or even play Dark Helmet again for an appearance in Goldberg's. But it didn't look like there would be a real comeback. Then, in 2020, Disney made the news that fans had been waiting for more than 25 years. Moranis would return for the new Shrunk. The news spread really quickly, met with the kind of happiness that's usually only seen when rock stars get back together. It wasn't just a return for people who watched him as kids. It showed that sometimes the simplest exits can lead to the most famous comes back. 16. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids for all of your fans. It wasn't just about Rick Moranis or big sets. The story was about 4 kids who went on a journey. They faced lawnmowers with wide eyes of fear, fought bees, and calmed Auntie. They looked like the stars of one of Disney's biggest live-action movies for a moment. But Hollywood isn't always a good place to be. The backyard was the start and end for 3 of them. Robert Oliveri, who played Nick Selinsky, looked like he was bound to become famous. He even played the same part in the sequel and in Edward Scissorhands. Then, he quit almost overnight and was no longer in the business at all. Jared Rushton played Ron Thompson, a tough kid who warmed up in the end. He had been in Big and Overboard before. By the middle of the 1990s, he had also stopped acting. Teenage Amy Selinsky was played by Amy O'Neill, who also tried modeling in a few parts before leaving Hollywood. She came back decades later in a Blinkin' You'll Miss It cameo on Baskets. Thomas Wilson Brown, who played Little Russ, was the only one who stuck around and made a decent living in smaller movies and on TV. The adults kept working, though. Fans of sci-fi shows like Orphan Black gave Matt Frewer steady parts, and Marcia Strassman worked until her tragic death in 2014. But The Backyard Adventure was more than just a show for the kids. It was their time in the sun and their goodbye to it. 17. The heart of the movie was James Horner, a score that is full of life, excitement, and wonder. The strange part is here. Disney never put it out. The soundtrack was kept secret for decades, even though Horner's music made every scene better, from Auntie's sacrifice to the thrill of the Bumblebee ride. It wasn't until 2009, 20 years after the movie came out, that a small label finally made 3,000 copies. They were very popular and sold out almost right away. Now people collect them. Horner had already made a name for himself with movies like Braveheart, Titanic, and Avatar by that time. He died in a plane crash just 6 years later, which was very sad. It's more than just a music for fans of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It's historical music from one of the best movie musicians ever. Batman owned number 18, which was in the summer of 1989. There were lines around city blocks for Tim Burton's gothic superhero epic, and every shop was full of merchandise. The buzz was like nothing Hollywood had ever seen before. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids looked like a mistake next to that huge hit. A strange family comedy that is doomed to fail. But things took a funny turn. When Batman came out, cinemas were packed to the brim. People with kids quickly learned that the long lines, late-night showings, and dark PG-13 rating weren't exactly family-friendly. Teenagers and adults went to see Gotham, but families went to see the smaller movie next door. After they bought a ticket to Honey, everyone else told their friends about it. Another surprise hit of the summer was The Backyard Adventure. It got better every week thanks to cool practical effects, great acting, and a story that every kid could picture happening in their own neighborhood. The movie quietly made $222 million around the world by the end of its run, making it Disney's biggest live-action movie at the time. It not only made it through Batman mania, it thrived on it. While Batman got all the attention, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids stole families' hearts and showed that small movies can sometimes stand up to big ones. 19. Disney's live-action business was having a hard time by the late 1980s. Big-budget attempts like Return to Oz had failed, and officials weren't sure if the brand could do well in fields other than animation. That changed after Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. The movie, which cost only $18 million to make, didn't look like a cheap project at first glance. Families kept coming back week after week, and word got around that this was a kid movie that adults could also enjoy. The box office slowly grew. It made between $200 million and $22 million around the world by the end of its run. This was an amazing return that helped Disney's live-action division get out of its slump. It showed that the company could still make big movies that weren't animated. There's a good chance that we wouldn't have had the live-action run that Disney had in the 1990s without Honey. 21. The movie kept making money with sequels. Disney made the TV show Honey, I Shrunk the Kids in 1997. A lot of shows were made over 3 seasons, which is a lot for a spin-off. But there was a big problem. Oh no. Rick Moranis. The shows didn't get much attention because the movies were the main focus. A small group of people watched it, mostly kids who watched Disney Channel repeats. But most people who liked the first movies didn't even know it existed. It's just a strange aside now. A reminder of how big the shrinking ray used to be, even if the TV show never quite got the magic. Extra fact, it's been years since fans last went back to the backyard. Disney told us about Shrunk in 2019. In this new version set in the present day, Josh Gad plays Wayne Szalinski's grown son, and Rick Moranis finally comes back after more than 20 years. The news came as a surprise. The dad who left was finally getting some attention again. But Hollywood had other ideas. The movie was going to be shot in 2020. Then there was a big sickness. Disney moved on to Marvel and Star Wars and slid even further down the list. People said it was still alive every year, but no cameras ever went rolling. For fans, the wait hurts a lot. Moranis' return was meant to be a party, a full-circle return of one of moviegoers' favorite dads. Instead, the project has become stuck in development hell. Like the kids in the first movie, viewers are left staring across a backyard that seems to get bigger and bigger, asking if they'll ever get to the other side. Disney didn't plan for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids to be their biggest live-action hit. It came from a sick director, a scary pitch that didn't work, and a title that was made fun of for having bad grammar. Still, it all made sense in the end. We got big Cheerios, an ant as a pet that made us cry, and a garden that turned into the best adventure a kid could ever hope for. The live-action part of Disney's studio was saved. It became a pop culture icon, and fans begged for more. Leave a comment if this backyard adventure still makes you think about what it would be like to be 0.5 inches tall. You can help us figure out what magical classic to read next by telling us what small idea can lead to a big story.